Hello and welcome back to Global Value. In today's video, we are going to be performing a fundamental stock analysis of VF Corporation, ticker symbol VFC. VF Corporation, or Vanity Fair, is a dividend king that has increased its annual dividend payments for each of the last 50 years. They are a component member of the S&P 500, which puts them in this very select company of being dividend kings. Other companies that are dividend kings include Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, and Johnson & Johnson. So very select company. At the time of recording this video, VF Corporation is trading for $46.63 per share. Year to date, their stock price has dropped pretty dramatically, down 38%, which is much worse than the overall market. Over the past year, they're down 40%. Over 3 years, they're also down 40%. Over 5 years, their stock price is down 25%. Going back 10 years, they're up 2% compounded annually. And going back prior to the global financial crisis, they have compounded at a rate of about 7.5% compounded annually. Keep in mind that this return is not including dividends, so they're a dividend king. And currently, they have a more than 4% dividend yield. So their dividend yield will be in addition to the compound annual return in their stock price. So VF Corp is trading just over their 52-week low, which is down quite a bit from their 52-week high. A little under 4% of the company's shares outstanding are currently sold short, and they have about a $17.5 billion market cap. So for some background about the business, VF Corporation is in the consumer cyclical manufacturing apparel and accessories business. VF designs, produces, and distributes branded apparel and accessories. Its largest apparel categories include action sports, outdoor, and workwear. Its portfolio of about a dozen brands includes Vans, The North Face, Timberland, Supreme, and Dickies. VF markets its products in the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific through wholesale sales to retailers, e-commerce, and branded stores owned by the company and partners. The company has grown through multiple acquisitions and traces its roots back to 1899. VF Corp is headquartered in Denver, Colorado. So for our fundamental analysis today, we're going to be using a modified version of the 8-pillar analysis popularized by Everything Money, taking a look at 8 key financial metrics of VF Corporation as a business to come to a holistic and beginning understanding of their business based on those fundamentals. So let's get right into it. Starting off with pillar number 1, we want their average PE over the last 5 years to be below 22.5. Currently, VF Corp is trading for 17.5 times earnings. Their earnings all over the place during 2020, where they had both a huge PE ratio because of a loss in earnings, as well as they actually went to a negative earnings toward the end of the year. That's bounced back, and so far they're more on track with their historical averages. Going back prior to the pandemic, it looks like they were trading at, sometimes a premium above this 22.5% metric, but more or less in line with it. Currently, based on where their stock price is at, we're going to give pillar 1 to them as a check. However, given their fluctuations, this metric is really not going to be helpful here for VF Corp. Pillar number 2, we want their average return on capital over the last 5 years to be above 9%. So over the long run, over the course of decades, a stock is going to return approximately what its underlying business returns, and these business returns are going to be captured by return on capital. So their fiscal year starts and ends after the first calendar quarter each year. So over this time frame, we've seen that they did pretty well. However, their business was significantly impacted by the global pandemic. And in their fiscal year for 2020, the business only produced 6.6% returns on capital after a lot of their stores had to be closed. And I'm guessing after a lot of restructuring, given the overall disruption to their supply chain and their way of doing business. Still, they've rebounded quite nicely. They're producing 16% returns on capital as of their most recent fiscal year. And if we look at their last 12 months, they're still producing about 15% returns on capital. So that's excellent to see here that the company has rebounded from the pandemic. Over this time frame, they're producing about 14.5% average returns on capital. So this is going to be our second check in a row here on pillar number 2. Pillar number 3, we're looking for 5-year revenue growth. Outside of some absolutely massive acquisition relative to their business size or a potential spin-off or merger, I'd be interested to see what happened in 2018 to 2019. Either way, they've grown revenues over this time frame up to about $12 billion in their most recent financial year. So this is going to be a check here on pillar number 3. Pillar number 4, we want to see 5-year net income growth. Similar story to their revenue growths. Again, you're going to want to learn more about what happened year over year in their fiscal 2018. But as of the most recent financial year, which ended after the first calendar quarter of 2022, they produced nearly $1.4 billion of earnings. So this is another check here on pillar number 4. Pillar number 5, we're looking for decreasing shares outstanding. When you purchase a share of stock, what you're really buying is a fractional ownership percentage in that underlying business. When a business buys back shares by decreasing the amount of stock that they have outstanding, they're increasing your ownership percentage in the business without you having to spend a dime, which ultimately increases the percentage of the business's profits that you're going to be entitled to. Over this time frame here, VF Corp has done slight buybacks. They bought back just over 2% of their shares outstanding. So this is going to be a check here on pillar number 5. So far through 5 pillars, we've got 5 checks. We're starting off very strong here. Let's keep it going into pillar number 6. Pillar number 6, we're looking for 5-year free cash flow growth. Free cash flow is cash from operations minus capital expenditures. It's this column here in green. Free cash flows are the lifeblood of any business, and a business's abilities to produce free cash flows, discounted back by some reasonable interest rate, is ultimately what that business is going to be worth. So a business can use free cash flows to pay dividends, buy back shares, pay down debt, make acquisitions, or reinvest back into the business. In fiscal 2017, they had negative cash from operations along with capital expenditures, thus they had negative free cash flows. In their most recent fiscal year, they had positive free cash flows. They produced $619 million of free cash flow. So this is going to be a check here on pillar number 6. In an average year over this time frame, VF Corp is producing about $700 million in free cash flow. This is going to be important going forward on pillar 7 and 8. Then another thing to note here is that in their fiscal 2020, they spent over $2 billion in cash acquisitions. This was part of their $2.1 billion of the streetwear brand Supreme. Next up, for pillar number 7, we want their net debt, which is long and short-term liabilities minus cash and short-term cash equivalents, to be below their average 5-year free cash flow multiplied by 5 to help us evaluate how the business is utilizing leverage. We don't want to be invested in companies that are overly levered because they're at the greatest risk of failure, especially during hard economic times. So as of the end of their most recent fiscal year in the spring of this year, VF Corp had $5.5 billion of net debt. When we multiply their average 5-year free cash flow of $700 million times 5, that only brings us to $3.5 billion. So this is going to be an X here. The business is utilizing more leverage than we're comfortable with. It would seem by looking at their net debt over time that the business had to take on significant amount of leverage during the pandemic. And it looks like they've been prioritizing paying this down. So hopefully they can continue to pay this down. But this is going to be an X here on pillar number 7, as currently their amounts of debt are not supported by their cash flows. Then finally, the big pillar of them all, pillar number 8, we want their market cap to be below their average 5-year free cash flow multiplied by 20 to give us a reasonable starting point for evaluation of the business. So currently, VF Corp has a market cap of $17.7 billion. When we multiply their average 5-year free cash flow of $700 million a year times 20, that's only going to bring us to $14 billion. So this is going to be an X here. We're off by nearly $3.5 billion on pillar number 8. Here we're looking at their dividend profile. So VF Corp is a dividend king that has paid out an increasing dividend for each of the last 50 years. If a business's dividend is part of the consideration of why you're investing in the business, you want to make sure that that dividend is supported by their abilities to produce free cash flows. In this case, VF Corp has only supported their dividend via their free cash flows in 2 out of these 5 years, which is not a great sign for the business overall. Hopefully they're able to keep increasing their cash flows. Honestly, it looks like the business is coming under some pressure and that continuing to increase this dividend may not be the most prudent use of capital for the business, and that they could potentially be using this money to be paying off debt instead. Again, currently VF Corp has more than a 4% dividend yield, which is quite high, but you're going to want to dig into the company's filings in more depth to truly understand management's capital allocation philosophies and their approach to how they're going to manage this dividend going forward. But compared to some of these other dividend kings that we've looked at, it would seem that VF Corporation's dividend would be under significant pressure compared to some of these other dividend kings. So in summary, VF Corporation checks the box on 6 out of 8 pillars. Currently, the business is utilizing more leverage than their free cash flow supports, and their market cap relative to their abilities to produce free cash flows is richly valuing the business. However, they're producing above average returns on capital, and they've increased their revenues, net incomes, and free cash flows over this time frame, even despite the setbacks that the business had from the pandemic. They've also reduced shares outstanding just a little bit, while making a pretty large, mostly cash acquisition for Supreme in 2020. Then to give more detail about what happened in 2018 that affected the company's financials there. In August of 2018, it was announced that VF Corporation would be splitting into two companies. Their jeans and outlet stores were spun off as Contour Brands, and VF Corporation kept the sports apparel and footwear businesses and moved its corporate headquarters to Denver. All brands, which until 2018 had maintained separate divisional headquarters, were also consolidated into VF Corporation's new Denver headquarters at this time. Contour Brands Inc. became a separate company with the stock symbol KTB in May of 2019. Contour Brands includes Lee, Wrangler, Rockin' Republic, and VF Outlets, and they are headquartered in Greensboro, North Carolina. So hopefully that provides some more clarity and background about their financial statements there. Keep in mind that this type of analysis is not financial advice. It is not a buy or sell recommendation of any security. And before making any sort of investment, it's important that you do your own homework and that you consult with the properly registered financial or legal professionals. So with that said, that's it for today's fundamental stock analysis of VF Corporation, ticker symbol VFC. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stock analysis videos, and comment down below what business you want me to take a look at next time. Thanks for learning about VF Corp with me, and have a great day.